What's up guys, Wade Willis here for my playthrough of Umineko. This is Chapter 3, Part 12, and things have gotten very interesting. Ava Beatrice is just running wild, just took out Kraus and Natsui. Once the stakes go through the specific points in the body, she should be done with the ritual. Now, at the same time, Beto is helping George revive Shannon. Now, if Shannon's revived before the other two happen, we could have an interesting situation over here. So I'm kind of hoping that Shannon gets revived before Beatrice Ava is done with her torture of Kraus and Natsui. But yeah, super pumped. And guys, don't forget to like the video. And if you haven't already subscribed, please do. Trying to reach 2,000 subscribers and get pretty close to it. And yeah, let's get into it, guys. However, Beta was the same. Now that she had handed her name over, most of her previous power had been lost. Of course, she still had more than enough power to be called a witch, but compared to the past, it was a very faint thing.
いいぞ。声をかけるな。手で触れるな。心の声で呼べよ。心の手で求め。そなたの強き思いだけ。シャノンの失われた魂、わらわの魔法を届かせる。
George kept praying earnestly and silently. He kept frantically yelling inside his heart, trying to call back the soul of the person he loved. He strongly envisioned his soul leaving his body and searching for her as she wandered through the land of the dead. Beto turned that strong force into magic power that supplemented her own magic. This was a magic that, in the past, she could have performed easily without anyone's help. But now, if she didn't rely on someone's assistance, she wouldn't be able to finish the chant, much less succeed.
数百年近くも忘れて魔法と反言とはこんなにも辛い魔法であったか。
Probably, since people aren't resurrected often. Beto was wearing an even more strained expression than George. It had slipped her mind, but originally magic to revive a life was the ultimate hidden art. The abnormal thing was her previous magical power, which could be used over and over with a snap of her fingers. So the heavy burden on her body and mind was, fundamentally speaking, extremely natural.
しかし、こやつめの力、魔法を知らぬというのにかなりのもの。
Yeah, that is pretty impressive. He was flying earlier.
さすがは金蔵の孫といったところか。
The strong energy pouring from George was large enough to act as magical power. At first, Beto thought it might be the blood of Kinzo, the sorcerer. However, that probably wasn't it. She had a feeling that Battler already told her what it was. It had been born from the power of George's sadness at the death of the person he loved, and from the way he had tried his hardest throughout his life. From the warm times spent together with Shannon, to the size of the dream they swore to protect in the future. Is it really possible for humans to take life so seriously, even though they only have a single one? It was only natural. To her, a life didn't mean anything more than the difference between the top and bottom of an Othello piece. If black represented death, then she thought all you had to do was flip it over and make it white. However, it was just like that broken vase. To humans, in a world without magic, where they cannot return things to their original form, it is very, very natural for them to bet their life and soul.
生死すら自在にする無限の魔女。死の山さえ越えられぬ有限の人間に劣ることもあるというのか。
This time the witch acknowledged it. He was able to hold a magical power that could never reside in witches who didn't understand the value of life. Why does this thing called endless magic exist? Even though I called myself the Endless Witch, did I forget what the endless magic means for 1,000 years? She looked at George's expression again. His surging earnestness was like a lightning bolt. Right now, even if George's body had been burned or smashed by a waterfall, he would probably continue to pray for his beloved without minding it, without noticing it. For the first time, she showed respect for that power. So in that instant, all the magical resistance was lost, and the enormous power of George's feelings turned into magical energy in complete form. Oh wow. Hell yeah, George. The vase was very beautiful, rich with history and value. Even as young as I was, it still forced me to take a deep breath when I witnessed its beauty. But that just made me want to touch it. But the vase easily fell and smashed into pieces, like a bubble that had popped. It felt as though the time it had possessed a form had been just an illusion. Lives are just that fragile, just that easily lost. I realized that my foolish curiosity had led to something that couldn't be undone. No matter how much I regretted it, no matter how much I apologized, that smashed vase wouldn't return back to its original form. A lost life will not return to normal, no matter what happens. I was frightened that, even though my actions had been thoughtless and careless, they had stolen away a life that could never be revived again. Then, I pitied that lost life and cried. I was frightened of myself, and the one responsible for its loss, and cried even more. I'm sure Grandfather would also cry at the loss of his precious vase. I'm sure that all people who love Grandfather and had seen him like that will cry. With the loss of a single life, the whole world can be filled with so much sadness. I cried even more at how terrible that was. Beatrice appeared and spoke.
ならばお嬢様、この壺を魔法で蘇らせましょう。それで皆が幸せになれるなら、壺も魔法も精霊たちも、喜んでそのために力を貸し、元の姿を取りも、さあさあ、お嬢様、目を閉じて、私と一緒にお歌を歌いましょう。さあさあ、目を閉じてごらんなさい。そして思い出してごらんなさい。あなたがどんな姿をしていたのか。それはきっと、とてもとても美しい姿。どうか私に、あの姿をもう一度見せておくれ。
Is she gonna revive? I mean, that would make the plot way better for this part. Those words of power knocked forcefully on the door of the land of the dead. The magic of her old self had performed that same forceful knock. However, doing it that way was horribly violent and earned the displeasure of the peacefully sleeping dead. But this time was different. It was very forceful, yet gentle and loving. The dead near the door opened their eyes and called out to the others that were there was a voice calling for someone to come back. The sadness of that voice calling from outside touched the hearts of the dead, and trying to respond quickly as possible, they searched for Shannon's lost soul. And then, they found it. They found the casket in which Shannon was peacefully sleeping. It was truly Shannon's soul, sleeping in the land of the dead. Inside the casket was covered with rose flowers, frozen with frost. She was sleeping in peace. The dead silently lifted the casket up. While at a glance it looked like a funeral march, it had the complete opposite meaning. It was solemn but filled with joy. The long-forgotten dead were made to remember that they were loved after their deaths, and they were all given a warm sense of peace. Then, as though guided by a warm light from the heavens, Shannon's body floated up out of the casket. The dead watched her go. They squinted at that warm light, offering their respect to this unknown member of the living, who had not lost his love for a person even after their death. Let's go! Come on! Shannon's body was enveloped in the light from the heavens and began to disappear. In the jet-black darkness of the land of the dead, the faint flickering of the gold butterflies could be seen. It reminded them of the gentle stars in the night sky, which they had long forgotten. George remembered being told that he must not say anything, and he hurriedly covered his mouth. However, it felt like his heart was trying to jump into his throat, because he had seen Shannon's eyelids shake slightly. Come on, let's go! Then, those eyelids slowly opened. Hell yeah! Shannon's eyes were there, but they were still wrapped in the fog of the land of the dead. However, the human world's warmth? No, her lover's warmth, which had called back her soul, slowly dissolved that fog, and her eyes gradually regained their sparkle. Then, her eyes moved and recognized George.
George-san.
As her lips shook weakly, Shannon definitely said that. Those words were very faint, so much so that they normally wouldn't have reached his ears. However, George clearly heard them. He heard the person he cared for, his fiancée, the one he loved most and who should have been dead, call his name once again.
Shano, 僕がわかるかい?
ジョージさん、これは夢なの?
No, you're back, homie.
いや、これは夢じゃないよ。だからほら、つねっても冷めないよ。
As George said that, he softly pinched Shannon's cheek. It was to show how George had always responded in the past, when Shannon had been surprised by something and had asked if she was dreaming. When Shannon felt the warm touch of George's finger on her cheek, and when George realized that the warmth of the living had already returned to his beloved person's cheek, they both cried. What words should a pair of lovers separated by death celebrate with when they were reunited? The words of the human world are not enough. In short, they have no need for words of this world. George simply hugged Shannon, who was sitting up without talking. Shannon's strength was still feeble, but putting her arms around George's back took all she had. So George hugged her tightly to make up for that. To stop each other from going once more at each other's, go more to a place that the other's hand couldn't reach, they hugged each other so tightly and yet so gently. As Shannon's fingers curled around George's back, on her ring finger the engagement ring George had given her definitely shone. The strong glint certainly wasn't just the sparkle of a diamond. There was definitely magical power that only those two lovers could possibly feel. It was because of that strong light existed that they had been able to find her casket in the land of the dead. Beto understood. That ring, no. The feelings of the pair embodied in that ring were a miracle made real. In that moment, George definitely used magic. Beto had done nothing more than help him along. That magic had power that could only reside in those who knew the importance of life, who knew what it meant to try with all one's might. It was with the power of a miracle, one that the Endless Witch couldn't possibly know of. A miracle that only the power of the finite could give rise to. By now, she had no choice but to accept it. She had to accept that true magic, true magical power, existed in the place furthest away from she who called herself a great witch.
Beatrice-sama.
彼女が君を生き返らせてくれたんだ。ありがとう、ベアトリーチェ。
わらわは何もできなかった。シャノを蘇らせたのは、そなたの魔法、奇跡を成し遂げる後宮の地。確かに見届けさせてもらったぞ。ジョージさんが私を？うん。わらわなど足元にも及ばぬほどの凄まじき魔力であったぞ。わらわなどまだまだ見習いの域を出ぬか。今こそ身の程を知ろうぞ。
Beto staggered backwards. Her physical strength was clearly exhausted. She had humbly said that George's power alone had revived Shannon, but Beto also used all of her magic magical and physical strength. When she reflected upon how difficult it was to revive a single life, something she had been able to play around with however she wanted to in the past. The couple kept on embracing each other tightly. By doing that, those feelings that couldn't be communicated with a billion words were shared.
ありがとう、ベアトリーチェ。君は僕たちの恩人だ。
ありがとうございます、ベアトリーチェ様。再びジョージ様に会わせてくださったこのご恩を決して忘れません。
よせよせ。愛し合う二人に感謝されては、外道の極みと恐れられたわらわには、くすぐったすぎるというものよ。わらわのことは、気に存分に、再会を祝い合え。
Beto, who was leaning her back against the wall, slid down the wall and sat. How many centuries had it been since she grew this tired from using magic? I probably haven't been this tired since the first time I succeeded in magic. Didn't teacher praise me that time? Oh, but didn't I kill that same teacher who praised me? Don't be so naive, Beatrice. Isn't that what killing means?
ようやく魔法の使い方を思い出したようですね。
頭ん中酸欠でカラッカラで、思い出すもヘチマもねえぜ。それよりあんた、殺したじゃねえかよ。現れるんじゃねえよ。
あなたが未だに私を生かしていますよ。だからこうして現れられます。もっとも、あなたの頭を撫でに来たわけでもありませんが。
無様なわらわを、わざわざ嘲笑いに来たかよ。それに、隠居までした魔女が、今さら頭なんか撫でられちゃ、他の魔女の笑い物だぜ。
I wonder if she brought Battler.
そうですね。一人前どころか、現役を退いたと豪語するあなたなのに、今頃になって魔法の使い方を覚えたなど、恥ずかしくて誰にも言えませんね。
だなあ。内緒にしてくれよ、お師匠様。
Beto gazed at the couple hugging each other with a sense of pleasant despondency.
愛か。勝てねえな。
45、データ治療。
Oh shit.
射撃準備完了。
Uh-oh.
弾種選定、装填。410、射撃。
Oh no.
にひ。
The gold snake arrows fired by the Cheesters weaved its way through the bushes. The rose guard weaved its way through the hedges and climbed the stone steps, aiming for the keyhole. It weaved through the corridors and flew in the keyhole of the door to the parlor. It happened in an instant. One could hardly blame Beto, who was completely worn out, for not noticing it beforehand. Right before Beto's eyes, the gold snake flew through the keyhole, surrounded the two lovers, and pierced the two hearts in a blink of an eye. Furthermore, the gold snake faithfully pierced a hole through Shannon's chest once more. The two hearts were pierced by that gold snake. No, by that gold sewing thread of the new brutal witch's furniture. And it had happened in an instant, mocking the amount of effort it had taken to revive Shannon. What the hell? Before Beto's shocked eyes, the two fell over and landed on the floor.
ジョージ、シャノン。
ベアトリーチェ、わずかの間でも会わせてくれてありがとう。
George spent his last breath thanking Beto and died alongside the one he loved. The gold snake, which still sewed the two in place, spun like a large cyclone, revolving around the inside of the parlor. It was searching for further prey in that room. Is it attacking Beatrice? Then the tip of the stake met Beato's eyes. In that instant, Beato was prepared to die. At that moment, Virgilia stood in front of her, the fingers of both her hands drawing a seal. Instantly, gold-colored leaf buried inside the parlor. It was like a blizzard of gold.
ベアト、今のうちに逃げて。シエスタの黄金宮からは誰も逃れられない。
410標的疾患。にひゃ魔法機マシ。45了解。索敵変更対人画像追尾方式。標的再補足。410へデータリンク。410データ受領。すっとろいにえ先代様。来て来て来て。着弾。
Prey targeted by the Cheeser sisters' golden bow did not escape. It could not be blocked. No magical barrier could even dream of blocking it without being multi-layered. The gap opened during that instant of confusion caused by Virgilia's deception magic was Beato's only chance to escape, and it was the only chance to make the sisters confuse Virgilia for Beato. As Virgilia spread her arms wide, blocking the way to her beloved disciple, the gold stake pierced straight through her heart. After sneaking through the keyhole, the snake shot through George, Shannon, then Virgilia in an instant, completely failing to notice Beato as she used that instant to escape. Well, I guess that's good. As soon as Virgilia saw Beato had gotten away, she died. The strength left her body, and like gold dust drifting with the wind, her form was erased. Beato completely erased all traces of her magical power, became gold butterflies, and passed through the wall, escaping into the wind and rain outside. Beato felt regret from the bottom of her heart. Why? Because she had been attacked by the new witch? Probably not. Of course she hated losing her teacher. And even more importantly, Beato was enraged at the barbarianism that had boorishly stolen away the reunion between the two lovers. That's so different from Beatrice before. Beato had poured out almost all of her magical power to reunite them. Even though the result had been a miracle, the time it took to steal away that had been so ridiculously short. Beato trembled at the barbarous cruelty that had brought about such an abrupt end. Besides, this was the true form of acts she herself had committed up until that point. So just as strongly as Beato hated the new witch, she also looked at her previous self with disgust. But now she had to escape. If she was targeted next, she would probably lose her life. To think that a chess player had descended, thinking that they were like a god, only to be attacked by the pieces.
間違いなく先代様を撃破しました。また私たちの撃墜気象が増えちまうね。にひ。愛し合う二人。なんだっけ？引き裂いて一度、合わせて二度、もう一度引き裂いて三度楽しめる。だっけ？そのついでにあのクソうるさいババアまでさよならできて最高にご機嫌よ。ロノウェイ、 文句ないわよね。
ございませんとも、ベアトリーチェ様。
あいつは魔女の碑文の儀式を妨害したのよ。第一の番の生贄を勝手に蘇らせて私の儀式を妨害したわ。文句言われる筋合いなんかなんにもないわよ。しかしずるいなあ。あいつは死体を残さないのね。あのババアも思いっきり何度も無限にいじめ殺して遊んでやろうと思ったのに。
So is she gonna have to revive everyone and kill them all again? At least that did mess with the ceremony.
ジョージが来てないわよ。いつ降りたのよ。
いつって。あれは何時くらいだったっけ？
確か4時か5時くらいだったかな。最低でも1時間以上は前だよ。
俺たち眠くなってその後は多分居眠りしてたし。でも多分ジェシカの言う通りだと思うぜ。1時間か2時間くらい前だった。
私もそのくらいの頃だと記憶しています。コーヒーのおかわりはいるかと聞かれましたからな。
Something hard to believe had happened. Apparently when Aunt Ava had left for a second to wash her hands, Uncle Kraus and Aunt Natsui had disappeared. There's no way they went hiding somewhere. Of course the doors and windows had all been rigorously checked and they were all locked from the inside. Not one of them broken. And that wasn't just true for the first floor, the second floor was the same. Again, all the doors and windows had locks built in a way that made it impossible for them to lock from the outside. In other words, there was no way that Uncle Kraus and Aunt Natsui had gone outside. And yet they couldn't be found. Furthermore, they weren't the only ones who had disappeared, so had George of all people. George had left saying he was going to get more coffee, and had gone downstairs more than an hour earlier. We'd assumed that he was having a conversation with Aunt Ava and the rest. But Aunt Ava, who had been in the lobby the whole time, said that no one had come down. Since all the doors and windows were locked from the inside, it was unthinkable that they had gone outside. However, 3 humans had evaporated from this barricaded house, which had become a perfect closed room. In a situation like this, we couldn't imagine that this was because they were playing hide and seek and trying to scare us with a prank. It was probably reasonable to assume that they had gotten caught up in this crime. When Aunt Ava had learned that her only son was missing, she had gone half insane, running from room to room and yelling his name. And Jessica had suddenly lost both of her parents and chased after her. Cries of George, and Mom and Dad continued to echo through the guest house for some time. I think George said something about wanting to see Shannon's dead face. It would be reasonable to assume that he snuck out of the guest house if he snuck out of the guest house and went to the mansion. But he didn't have a clue about Uncle Kraus and Aunt Natsui. Did they see him leave and then go to the mansion and search for him? Without telling Aunt Ava? At this rate, it's only a matter of time before we start planning to leave the guest house to go search for them. When that time comes, I'll agree. We thought staying holed up in the guest house would be safe, which was why our first big group, happy group of 12, locked themselves up here this morning. And yet, there's only 4 of us left. That means staying here is no guarantee of safety. However, there's one thing that we can't afford to forget. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside. This is a closed room. How did they manage to vanish from this place? We searched around thoroughly. However, we couldn't find any traces of someone hiding. 3 of them had almost certainly been taken outside the guest house.
どうやってでしょう。
The only thing they can check is that underground thing, right?
まさか隠し扉とかがあるとか。
隠し扉。
扉も窓も外から閉めることは構造上不可能です。釣り糸の類を使ってもこの構造では無理でしょうな。となれば扉や窓以外から出たと考えるのが妥当でしょう。
確かにそういう論法にもなるだろうよ。隠し扉が存在しないなんて断言は誰にもできない。しかしそういう発想に飛躍する前に俺はもっとシンプルな可能性も疑ってる。
と申しますと？
For some time, Balor had been opening windows and opening shutters and checking outside, repeating this for each window.
この窓は静かだな。なるほど。この窓は他と違って建物の構造上風が吹き込まないわけか。
そのようですな。こんなにも外は風雨なのに雨も風も入ってこないとは不思議な気持ちです。
南條先生、今窓を開けた時音を感じたかい？
いえ、気にはなりませんでしたな。よく油が効いていると思います。
つまり誰も見ていない廊下の窓からひょろっと抜け出すことは可能なわけだ。しかもこの窓なら風も吹き込まないから風圧でカーテンや扉が音を立てることもない。静かなもんさ。
Battler leaned forward and looked at the ground below. He was searching for some sign that George had jumped down, but at a glance he didn't see any mark on the grass in the middle of the pouring rain.
こういう窓が1階にもあるのかもしれない。誰にも気づかれずに表へ出ることは可能だぜ。
Yeah, but how does the door remain locked?
しかし扉はおろか、窓は全て施錠されて鎧戸まで閉まっていましたぞ。出ることは可能でも閉めることは不可能だ。
閉められるぜ。こうやってカチャンとな。
Battler closed the windows and locked it as though it was perfectly obvious.
まさかバトラさんは？
最後に中の人間が鍵を閉めればこんな密室は朝飯前だ。
しかしそれでは
Naoto turned pale and shook his head several times, because the thing Battler had said had forced him to face the fact that was frightening even to imagine.
俺の想像したトリックならな。しかしこんなトリックを使えば怪しまれる人物は極めて限定される。
He didn't want to say it in front of Nanjo, but after eliminating Jessica, who had been with him the whole time, only Nanjo and Ava could have done it.
私はそんなことをしませんぞ。誓ってもいい。
となるとエヴァおばさんと南條先生のアリバイ合戦ってことになる。俺たちは二人とも怪しんでそれぞれを別々に監禁すればいいだけの話。逆に言えばこのトリックはもっと生存者が多ければ有効かもしれないが、これだけ人数が減った状況下では大して有効ではないんだ。
No, on the contrary, there'd be a chance of having your own neck strangled by using it. It would have been more advantageous to make it look like the culprit was outside, to intentionally leave the door unlocked, or to break a window.
もしこの失踪劇が今日の昼にでも起これば、俺は自信満々にこの説を発表しただろうよ。だが、この段階に至っては、全然自信が持てないぜ。何なんだこいつは。一体何を意味してやがるんだ。
Someone could have just seen it was unlocked and locked it though. And not been the murderer. Right?
この密室はよ。
やはりその。
なんだい南條先生。 思いつきでもいいから言ってくれよ。
Nunja looked like he was trying to swallow his words, even though he thought of something, so I urged him on. After Nunja refused several times, saying that it was just a foolish idea, he finally said it out loud.
イエソン、やはりこれは本当に魔女の仕業ではないのかと。
バカバカしい。魔女なんているわけがねえぜ。
魔女は私たちに訴えたいのです。人間にはできないことをやってのけるからこそ、自分を魔女だと認めさせたいに違いないのです。私はこのゲストハウス全体の密室からの失踪は、そういう魔女からのメッセージだと感じています。考えてはならないのです。意味なんてきっとないのです。私は恐ろしい。
As Dr. Nunja shook with fear, it looked like he was trying to erase the fearsome thoughts that he had kept imagining one after another. When we went down the stairs, Jessica and Ava were enraged, and were each persisted in their desire to leave this place in search for their respective families. It was a desire that naturally hits those who can no longer see their family. Aunt Ava told Dr. Nacho and me to stay here, but I shook my head and started walking.
もう引きこもりはたくさんだぜ。俺も外の空気を吸いたくなってきた。
ああ、行くならさっさと行こうぜ。もうこんなところに閉じこもってるのはまっぴらさ。早く父さんや母さんやジョージ兄さんを探しに行こう。
Hold on, I'm gonna see, just double check to count the number of people dead. 1, 2. Oh, I guess we don't see their bodies. So for sure dead. Well, Shannon came. That's weird. Okay, well. Interesting. Okay. Sorry. The blood had all risen to Jessica's head. I hope it doesn't set her off her asthma.
残りたい人は勝手に残ってればいいわ。とにかく私たちは表を探してくるわ。
南條先生はどうする？一人で留守番してるかい？
私もご一緒させてください。
Yeah, I'd rather go with the people. Rather than holding up alone in the guest house whose security was by no means guaranteed, it would be better to enter a danger zone as a group of 4 people. I agree. Aunt Ava had a gun. Moving separately from her was almost like being asked to be made into the next victim. In this way, the 4 of us decided to leave the guest house. Even though it should have been safe to barricade ourselves here, we lost 8 people after doing so. It was almost as though this was a holding cell from which the sacrifices would be killed one after another. We removed the chain, unlocked the front door, and opened it. It was already pitch black. While there were some lights outside that dimly lit pathway, they didn't have enough power to pierce the darkness that some suspicious person might be hiding in.
行くわよ。
They might make it right
遅
to
れて
the
も知
tea
らないんだから
party.
ね。
Still holding her gun, Aunt Ava dashed out without an umbrella. Jessica followed after her. After glancing at each other, Dr. Nanjo and I chased after them. What in the world is happening in this mansion on this island? I've been shut in this guest house with the rest of the cousins since yesterday, so I don't know anything about what's going on outside. Just what is happening that I don't know about. Outside this room, in the mansion, on this island. Everything is happening, everything is proceeding, and everything is ending without my knowing it. Somewhere in my heart, I've already started giving up. Most likely, not one of us will see tomorrow morning. Yeah, that's true. When the singles cry, nobody will be left alive. Chester? Oh. Well, they found their bodies, I guess. Jessica's woeful voice echoed through the rose garden. Perhaps it was the intuition of a person who lived on this island. After checking the part of the rose garden where Aunt Rosa and Maria had fallen and seen nothing, Jessica went to look at in the arbor next. Normally the arbor would have been a wonderful location to enjoy some tea peacefully while appreciating the roses on a good sunny day. Maybe even Uncle Kraus and Aunt Natsui had days when they relaxed and enjoyed their tea together here. In that arbor lay their corpses. At least they aren't drenched in the rain like Aunt Rosa and Aunt Maria had been. But there was no way that I could say out loud to Jessica at the moment.
どうなんだ、南條先生。
I think they're dead.
考察ですが。ほら、ご覧なさい。首にくっきりと何か細いもので締めた跡が残っている。
だな。まさかこっちが主たる死因のわけはねえだろうよ。
Right there lay two stake-like weapons decorated with an occult design, which had been found driven into Krause's thigh area and Aunt Natsui's calf. When we found these sticking out of my parents' forehead and chest, we decided to preserve the crime scene and leave it for the police. But Jessica didn't care about such matters and immediately pulled the stakes out of her parents' forsaken bodies.
これで頭、胸、腹、膝、足の5つをえぐられた死体が出たわけね。
How weird is it going to be when they find, like, young Ava?
犯人め、殺してやる、殺してやる。第8の番まではこれで終わったわ。続くは第9の番なの。魔女は蘇り、誰も生き残れはしない。上等だぜ。魔女が蘇るってことは、犯人が堂々と姿を現してくれるってことなんだろう。何が誰も生き残れないだ。私が殺してやる。父さんと母さんを殺した犯人をこの手で絶対に殺してやる。
Jessica let her emotions flow out as she howled furiously. To avoid being crushed by grief, she could do nothing but resist with anger.
まだジョージが見つかってないわ。ジェシカちゃんたちはここにいたければいるといい。私は屋敷へ行くわ。
Yeah, right.
エヴァさん、バラバラに行動してはいけない。
I'm with Nanjo on
みんな
this.
で一緒に行動しなくては危険です。
兄さんたちはもうどうしようもないわ。でもジョージはまだどこかで生きているかもしれない。ここで時間を潰してる暇はないのよ。
As Aunt Ava screamed this, Jessica glared at her. Ava had no more time to bother about the dead. She was more concerned for the safety of her only son, who had yet been seen.
ジェシカちゃんはここでお父さんとお母さんのそばにいるといい。
I disagree.
私はちょっと屋敷に行ってくるわ。バトラ君も南條先生もここにいてくれていい。
After arbitrarily saying this, Ava rushed out of the arbor. I called out to stop her, but there was no way she would listen. However, being alone in this situation meant nothing short of death. If we silently watched her leave, it would be the same as letting her die. Since Aunt Ava was unwilling to stop, we had no choice but to follow her. And while it may be cruel to say so, Uncle Kraus and Aunt Natsui were already dead. So there was nothing more we could do for them. That is true. In the end, we had no choice but to console Jessica and head for the mansion together. Fortunately, Jessica stood up. Perhaps she had been able to break free from her grief, but what had surfaced in its place was an expression like a demon's.
私がこの手でぶっ殺して必ず敵を取ってやる。行こうぜバトラー。犯人を見つけたら邪魔をするなよ。
Dang, girl.
私が絶対に殺す。
I doubt it, but...
俺も親父たちの仇があるんだ。悪いが早いもん勝ちだぜ。
そうだな。
ぶっ殺してやろうぜ。
Hell yeah. At my words, Jessica seemed to feel like we sympathized with her emotions. She still had that dark expression, but I felt that Jessica had regained some of her sanity. We took off, chasing after Aunt Ava. Throughout the rose garden, up the stone steps, running at full speed towards the mansion whose large, intimidating shadow flashed in the lightning. Ah! With this, the murders of the epitaph had reached the 8th twilight. And then, on the 9th twilight, the witch shall revive. None shall be left alive. I will most likely lose my life, but at the very least I want to burn the truth into my eyes. That's the only thing motivating me right now. We were able to meet up with Aunt Ava, who was having trouble with the lock on the front door. It seemed to have that all the blood had risen to Aunt Ava's head. That was probably making her fingers clumsy. It looked like she couldn't even handle the simple task of inserting the key into the lock. Then there was a faint sound, the sound of the door unlocking, just as though it waited for all the survivors to unite before opening. It felt to me as though the malicious mansion was trying to swallow up the remaining humans at once. That is probably correct. Perhaps a stench that erupted outwards in the instant the door opened couldn't be described as just a smell. It wasn't just the charred smell from Grandfather. I think it may have contained the regrets of the servants and Dad's group, all of the dead. What did it mean as it floated out, overwhelming us? Was it the cry of the dead telling us not to enter? However, Aunt Ava didn't even flinch at something like that, and we had to chase after her, and were forced to step into the mansion after receiving that message.
Georgie? Georgie! 聞こえたら返事をしなさい! Georgie!
Aunt Ava shouted at the top of her lungs. Considering the situation, it's probably far too optimistic to imagine that he's alive. When we started following Aunt Ava's example and calling out George's name in loud voices, Aunt Ava spotted something and stopped walking. She was standing in front of the door to the parlor.
これは南條先生、ちょっと来てもらえるかしら。
何事ですかな。
I heard about the eerie magic circles written on the doors like the one on the parlor from the adults. Eerie is the only way to describe that thing, which was scribbled on with deep red paint reminiscent of blood so that it slowly dripped down. However, it had supposedly been there since this morning. Wondering why Aunt Ava had supposedly seen it already, would think it's odd now Jessica and I stared at the door.
確かに、こんな数字が書かれていた記憶はありません。
ええ、なかったわ。不気味な魔法文字みたいなのは書かれていたけど、数字は書かれていなかった。
From what the two of them said, only the magic circle had been there this morning. However, right now there were 8 digits written near the upper part of the magic circle. Oh. Hold on, I need to write that down. That's probably important. Zero 7 1 5 1 1 2 9. Okay. Yeah, I bet that's super important. I didn't know what it meant, but I didn't even want to imagine what someone had been thinking when they wrote it. It was drawn in the same paint as a magic circle, but it had clearly been written very recently. The way it had dried and the condition of the color was completely different from the magic circle part.
どうせ魔法的な意味があるんだろうぜ。深く考えたって意味なんかあるわけもないさ。
Jessica intentionally spat those words out in an attempt to push aside the eerie feel it gave off.
魔法陣というものかもしれませんな。
Huh?
ある種の数字遊びに魔除けが宿るという考え方です。
Magic Square.
どの列を足しても同じ数字になるみたいなものを皆さんも見聞きしたことがおありでしょう。
あれは四角形の中に埋めた数字の話じゃなかった？これは横一列だもの。何の意味があるのかさっぱりだわ。多分ジェシカちゃんの言うのが正解よ。私たちが深く考えたところで意味なんか何もないわ。
Even though she said that, she probably suspected that it actually meant something. Aunt Ava was definitely writing the numbers down on an old receipt or something that with a ballpoint pen. Unless it had some previous obvious pattern, it probably would be enough to memorize the code made up of an 8-digit number.
これ、日にちとか。
07 15 1129. Could that be when Beatrice was born?
日にち？何の話？
いや、偶然だろうけどな。俺の誕生日、7月15日なんだ。
Oh.
0715が7月15日を示すのかなって思ったら。
That is... Huh.
1129も、ほら、11月29日って読んだら、ちょうど語呂がいいかなって思ってよ。
Oh. Interesting. November 29.
そして11月29日ってなんだよ。
俺が知りてえぜ。
Maybe that might be Beatrice's
まあ、
birthday.
たまたまの偶然だろうけどな。
See, I was thinking July 15th, 1129.
そう考えたら、なんだか不気味になっちまったぜ。11月29日が誰かの誕生日だったりとかするのか？うちの家族は違うぜ。親父もキリエさんも、エンジェも違う。もちろん、俺のお袋もだ。
心当たりがありませんな。金蔵さんの誕生日でも、源氏さんの誕生日でもないはずだ。
うちの家族も違うわよ。ローザやマリアちゃんでもないわ。
うちの家族だって違うぜ。カノン君も違うし、シャノンも違う。私、使用人の人の誕生日にはちゃんとプレゼント渡してるからみんな知ってるけど。
Huh.
11月29日に誕生日の人間なんて知らないぜ。
Once we started imagining the 8 digits weren't meaningless, but actually the 2 dates written together, it actually started to look like that way. However, its true meaning may be something completely different, or it may be no meaning at all. Anyways, since we didn't have any real clues, it's probably pointless to stand around worrying about it. The inside of the parlor is much more important. This morning, behind each of the doors, with a magic circle drawn on them, had been a body of a victim. So something new had been added to this door. Does that mean that something new had been added inside the parlor? When Aunt Ava tried to open it, she felt the resistance of a lock. She immediately took out a master key and put it in the keyhole. She has a master key. Okay. As soon as she opened the door, Aunt Ava let out a high-pitched scream and ran inside. That alone was enough to tell us what had happened inside the room. Dr. Nanjo and I looked at each other and shook our heads slightly as we entered the parlor.
Georgie! Georgie! しっかりして! Georgie! Nanjo sensei, 早く!
Homie's dead. George lay there crumpled alongside Shannon's corpse. His chest was stained bright red, and judging by his still open eyes, I'd hate to say it to Aunt Ava, but I couldn't pick up any signs of life. After moving to take George's pulse, Dr. Nanjo shook his head and wordlessly reporting that George was dead. Brushing him aside, Aunt Ava once again crouched beside George and starting to cry at the top of her lungs. With George's death, only one thing is certain. The murders hadn't ended on the 8th twilight. The epitaph was being carried out in its complete form, including the 9th twilight, and none shall be left alive. I was starting to lose track of things. For some reason, Aunt Ava's half-crazed cries actually made me cool down. Crestfallen and exhausted, I flopped onto the sofa and plucked my feet on top of the table. Maybe all these murders numbed my heart. Instead of just being frightened, I was completely confused. Dad and Kyrie are dead, and the people have been killed off one by one, starting with the servants. And there's been a hell of a lot of them by now. I don't know when the first murder happened, but they might have been all killed at a rate about 1 person per hour by now. We believe that the boat will come around 9 tomorrow. There's still a full 12 hours until then. How many more sacrifices to the witch will there have to be for us to survive? With the 4 of us, if one goes each hour, we won't last any longer than 4 hours. We don't even know if they'll last until midnight tonight. Yesterday after lunch we came into this parlor. Just as they started talking about serving some tea Aunt Rosa had bought, we kids decided to take a walk. Maria was jumping around, wasn't she? Didn't Shannon bring us some cookies? Then she said Kumasawa had baked them or something. It would have been hilarious if she baked them with some mackerel into them, wouldn't it? That's right. I'll never hear Kumasawa's mackerel jokes again, will I? Oh right, if only I could remember stuff about Kumasawa. That wouldn't be fair to everyone else. Why did Dad and Kyrie even go outside? It's not like going without food for a day would kill us. So why did Gluttony get a hold of them and make them go out for food? I'll bet that fearless dad of mine just started complaining about being hungry. Kyrie, you were supposed to be the brakes for my reckless dad. Why didn't you stop him? And what about your daughter, Ange? She's just 6 years old. Don't tell me you're planning to leave her in my care. After all, it's doubtful now whether I'll be able to leave this island alive.
やめなさい。こんな時に争ってどうするんですか。ジェシカさん、やめなさい。
It's been kind of noisy for a while. By the time I looked over to see what happened, Jessica and Aunt Ava had suddenly started fighting each other. Now, maybe I should say that Jessica was grabbing at Aunt Ava.
エヴァおばさんが父さんたちを殺したんだ。他に説明がつかない。何をバカなことを。あんたのお父さんたちなんか知るわけないでしょ。ゲストハウスの1階にいたのは誰だよ。エヴァおばさんだ。1階のロビーには父さんと母さんと、そしてエヴァおばさんがいた。生き残ったのは誰だ。
I mean, she was the one who did everything.
エヴァおばさんだけだ。どうして。あんたが犯人だからに決まってるじゃないか。父さんと母さんを殺して外へ運び出して白々しく鍵を閉めて魔女の仕業なんかを装いやがったんだ。じゃあジョージはどうしていなくなったのよ。1階には降りてきてないのよ。じゃあ2階でいなくなったっていうの。2階には誰がいたのよ。あなたたちがいたんじゃない。あなたは知ってたんでしょ。ジョージがこっそりゲストハウスを抜け出すのを。それを自分は何も知らないような顔を抜け抜けと。あんたがジョージを止めててくれれば、ジョージは
やめなさいというのに。ジェシカさんはずっといとこ部屋にいました。そしてエヴァさんもずっと1階のロビーにいました。そして2人とも何も悪くない。ただ家族を失って悲しいだけなんです。犯人なんか誰もいない。どこにもいない。ただただ魔女のせいなだけなんです。だからお二人で憎み合うのはやめなさい。
The witch's fault, huh? I wonder if that's a good way to cool down the situation right now. Yeah, I finally understand why 3 people evaporated from the guest house when all the doors and windows were locked from the inside. This is what they were after. Making us think the culprit was inside, sparking this ugly mutual hatred. Has to be the culprits, the witch's goal. But if that's the case, how did the culprit lock from the outside? When Dad's group was attacked, their master key was definitely stolen. But the doors and windows to the guest house were built so that you couldn't lock them from the outside, no matter how hard you tried. So that master key should have nothing to do with the guest house closed room. Jessica and Aunt Ava were turning their sadness and losing their blood relatives into anger at the person in front of them. Dr. Nunja was trying to step between them. And I sat on the sofa staring up at the ceiling, thinking about things that didn't even matter anymore, with a worn-out expression. I couldn't just believe that this was the same parlor that had been so warm and pleasant midday yesterday, for just a short time before the typhoon hit. What? The fuck? The sudden sound of the gunshot shook me out of my half-asleep trance. Smoke was rising out of the barrel of Aunt Ava's hell. Jessica had fallen on the floor and was covering both of her eyes. Aunt Ava and Dr. Nanjo were looking down at her in shock.
大丈夫ですかジェシカさんジェシカさん
私のせいじゃないわよ。
Oh, okay.
あんたがよせっていうのに突っかかってくるから。おいおい、どうしたってんだ。何事なんだ。
So did Jessica grab at Aunt Ava, which turned into a scuffle? Did they start fighting over Aunt Ava's gun? Did some kind of impact cause the trigger to be pulled? It was probably Ava Beatrice, but I didn't know if the bullet had grazed her or if she'd been burned by the discharge. But either way, Jessica was covering both of her eyes, screaming that it hurts, rolling on the floor.
大丈夫落ち着いて大した怪我ではありませんぞ気をしっかり
Well, if she's blinded, isn't that somewhat serious? Dr. Naja lets Jessica borrow his shoulder, saying that he would tender to her in the servant room. The servant room in this mansion had a bed and a first aid kit and was able to function as an infirmary.
父さんと母さんの仇殺してやる殺してやる私じゃないわよ私じゃない
ジェシカさん傷に触りますからそれ以上騒がないでさあ使用人室に行きましょう
Well, those two are dead next. Jessica continued to curse at Ava as her parents' murderer. It seemed that Aunt Ava couldn't conceal her trembling at the fact that she had to pull the trigger, even though it had been an accident.
私のせいじゃないわよあの子が掴みかかってきたからこんなことに私は殺してなんかないわよそれよりジョージは誰が殺したのそうよジョージは誰が殺したのよジョージジョージ待てよエヴァおばさん一人になるな
I don't know if it was because Aunt Ava couldn't bear her mistake, or she given up control of her body in anger at the person who had killed her only son, or if it was both of those all mixed together. At any rate, she jumped out of the corridor, yelling, fearful, and screaming. I was also worried about Jessica's condition, but right then, I couldn't leave Aunt Ava alone. Why would she go off on her own in this mansion of all places? Is she suicidal? Dr. Naji took Jessica towards the servant room. I chased after Aunt Ava, dashing into the depths of the mansion. After sitting Jessica on the servant bed, Nandra told her several times not to touch her eyes and examine the affected area. The barrel had probably been near her eyes. There was a possibility that the flames from the discharge had injured her corneas. There was no threat to her life, but it probably would be necessary to take her to a doctor as soon as possible. Nandra applied emergency first aid, covering the affected area with gauze and wiping it with a bandage. As a result, Jessica completely lost her field of vision. Well, that's not like she needs to see right now. Imagine being stuck in a mansion where all these people have been killed and then being blinded.
明日になったらすぐに眼科の先生のところへ行きましょう。
あいつめ、本当は私を殺すつもりだった。
How did it not? So did it not have bullets? Like what's going on?
ちょっと角度が悪かったら今頃殺されてた。絶対にあいつを警察へ突き出してやる。
エヴァさんはそんなことはしませんぞ。あれは事故です。
事故なもんか。あいつが父さんと母さんを殺したんだ。この島には19人目も魔女もいるわけがない。あいつが全ての犯人なんだ。ゲストハウスの1階にはあいつだけがいた。父さんと母さんを殺し、それを見てしまったジョージ兄さんも口封じに殺したに違いない。
That's not a bad theory.
爺様や使用人の人たちだってそうさ。きっとあいつは夕べの親族会議の途中でこっそり抜け出し、みんなを殺したに
もしそうならば警察が調べればすぐにわかることです。警察はすごいですぞ。鑑識の手にかかればわからぬことなどありません。私たちは誰かを疑ったり恨んだりする必要などないのです。すべて警察が解決してくれます。だからジェシカさんは今は体を休め、目を楽にすることに専念するのです。あまり眉間にシワを寄せては目にはもちろん美容にもよくありませんぞ。
When Jessica's abuse of Aunt Ava had reached a crescendo, she actually had started glaring instinctively, and the pressure of her eyes had hurt her. Jessica herself realized that the more she talked, the more the wound would hurt. And regardless of whether she'd overcome her suspicions of Ava, she regained her composure for the time being.
あいつが殺したんだ。父さんや母さん、シャノンやカノン君も。カノン君。
She'd heard that Cannon had been killed in the chapel. Jessica still hadn't seen his face after he died. Jessica was now less fearful about the fact that she was blinded, and more frightened that the police would carry Cannon's body away while she still couldn't see, and that she would have to say her final farewell without being able to look at his face. Her anger at the culprit and her sadness at the death of the person she liked. Those mixed emotions started her crying. But right now, tears were actually painful to her, so she wasn't even permitted to leisurely remember his face in bygone days. Jessica could do nothing but sit on the bed and let her head drop, withstanding the pain.
さて、今度はエヴァさんの方が心配です。気に病まれていなければいいのですが。
Realizing that Jessica had calmed down for the time being and letting out a sigh, he stuck his head out the hallway to look for any sign of others coming back. Then their eyes met. Nanjo, unable to understand who the person was bewildered for an instant.
視力を失った人間って反魔法力も対魔法抵抗力もゼロになるんですって。つまり今のあんたはアイソレーテッドポーン。意味がわかるかしら。
なんですと?
Nanjo had no way of understanding who the person in front of him was, much less what she had just said.
南條先生、どうしたんです？
Unable to see Jessica to rely on voices to make out the situation, but since she heard Nanjo say something in an uneasy tone, she tightened up thinking that something bad might have happened.
やめてくれ殺さないでくれわしには病弱の孫がおるここでは死ねんのだ頼む見逃してくれ
I don't think that's gonna help you not get killed.
南條先生南條先生
Jessica couldn't do anything except call out from the bed. Judging by the tone of his voice, Nanjo was in the corridor confronting someone, and he was scared. His life may have been threatened just a second ago.
よせやめろ
第9の晩に魔女は蘇り
Homegirl is crazy. The witch pointed the end of her gold staff at Nanjo. Even though he didn't know what she was planning to do, Nanjo assumed that she must be trying to take his life.
南條先生南條先生そこに誰がいるんだよ返事をしろよ
やめてくれ
Bang! A sharp sound echoed. And just as sharply, the tip of the gold staff tapered and stretched, slicing Nanjo's forehead. Jessica, who could only try to grasp what was happening with her ears, had no clue what was going on. But even though she was able to realize with the sound, Nanjo had died. And she could tell that the person who was now in the corridor right in front of the servant room. Furthermore, she couldn't see she wouldn't be able to run away, much less resist. Knowing that she was a mouse in a trap, and in a life or death situation, Jessica shuddered.
ああジェシカかわいそうにね目を怪我しちゃったのねならあなたは逃げることもできないわね今から南條の死体でたっぷり遊ぶわそれに飽きたら次はあなたを殺してたっぷり遊んであげるいいえせっかく目が見えないんだもの殺してからだけじゃない殺す前にもたっぷり遊んであげるわねそこでしばらく震えながら待ってなさいね南條の死体で私がどんな風に遊ぶのかをたっぷり想像しながら
Jessica was struck with fear and let out a frail scream. She wanted to scream in a much louder voice, trying to get someone to help her, but she couldn't. When faced with true fear, it clogs up a person's throat. Right then, Jessica could barely even breathe.
助けて助けて
She searched around with her hands, trying to find some way to escape. But even though she should have known this room well, just being unable to see made it like a closed room of darkness. She ran into a shelf or something, and things like candy jars and bottles fell down, hitting her on the head. And as she was out, it would have been tough for her to even guard her head to block it. She was painfully aware of how perilous humans become just by losing their sense of sight. Of course, she had no time to be impressed by this fact. She crawled around at random, trying to escape from that place, but she kept bumping into things and didn't understand, getting hit by various falling objects, and it felt like the entire room was alive, bullying her and refusing to let her escape. Then a footstep could be heard from that presence in the hallway, and then a voice. She probably poked her head into the room since Jessica had been so loud.
にぎやかねレディーならおとなしくベッドに座って待っていなさい令状にふさわしい素敵な真っ赤な死に装束を与えてやるんだからあなたを見つけた人が失神してしまいそうになるくらいのね
Just until a second ago, she had sworn that she'd kill the culprit if she found them. However, she was now very powerless. She couldn't do anything except let out a scream, crawling on the ground on the floor and bumping her head into the bed and the legs of the desk. Well, Battler's the only one that could actually help you right now. Possibly. In the corridor, as the witch thought of how to toy with the Nandra's life, a single gold butterfly secretly watched the scene from the corner of the hallway. It was Beito, who had barely escaped with her life once before. The gold butterfly softly returned to human form. It was faint and transparent like a lace curtain. By now her power was so weak that even maintaining this form was difficult for her. Right next to her, Ronov also appeared.
ジェシカも生き残れはしないでしょう。もとより誰も生き残れはしませんが。
あやつはカノンに恋心を寄せておった。わらわはそれをもてあそんだこともある。しかしそれは魔女として恥ずべきことであった。
愛とは一なる元素。恋心はそれ以上に純粋で尊いものでございます。なぜかお嬢様はとてもそれを嫌われますが。
お師匠様は言った。魔法とは人を幸せにするためにあるとな。わらわもかつてはそれを知っていたはずだった。そしてそれを忘れた時から、だからわらわはバトラの対戦相手の資格を失っていたのだ。
まさかお嬢様、ジェシカを助けるおつもりですか。危険です。
分かっておる。どうせ助けても黄金鏡の扉が開けば魔女の宴の慰み者よ。しかしそれでもあやつの殺し方に比べれば数段慈悲深い。魔女の宴は恐るべき方法にて命を奪うが二度は奪わぬ。生死をもてあそばぬ。しかしあやつは違う。何度でも殺す。面白半分で殺す。そこにはわずかほどの慈悲もない。わらわはせめてジェシカをそのような残酷な運命から。
確かにそれを行うことは良き魔女として称えられることでしょう。しかし新しきベアトリーチェ様はすでにお嬢様のことを敵視なされています。もう一度姿を見られることがあったなら今度は逃れる術はありませんよ。
ジョージをシャノンに合わせた時、わらわはようやく、そして魔法とはどういうものなのかを理解したの。わらわは魔女だ。魔女であらねばならぬ。そしてバトラに対戦相手だと認められ、今度こそバトラに魔女、そのための。
Oops, sorry guys.
しかし今ここでその一歩を踏み出さねば、わらわは魔女を名乗れぬのだ。
お気持ちはわかりますが、どうやってお救いになるつもりです？
I'm curious of
今
that
のお嬢
myself.
様の身に使える魔法は多くありません。シャノンを蘇らせる時ですらジョージの力を借りたではありませんか。
うん、だからこそジェシカだけは救えるかもしれぬのだ。今あやつはカノンに助けを求めている。その思いの力を借りれば、わらわの魔力にてもう一度冥府の扉。
叩けはするでしょう。しかし魔力を使い切ります。 新しきベアトリーチェ様にもし見つかったら、本当に逃れる術はありませんよ。私はすでにお嬢様の執事ではありません。いざという時、お助けすることはできませんので、ご了承。
承知しておるわ。わらわはこれまで数えることもできぬほどの命をもてあそび、奪っならばその罪も同じ数だけの命を救うことでしかあがないぬのかもしれん。もとよりわらわに失うものなどないわ。名も魔力も引き継ぎ、今や魔女とも認められぬただの黄金の長女。
It's true, she has nothing to lose, really.
バトラ様はどうなさるのですか？ゲームの途中です。彼はお嬢様がお戻りになるまで待つとおっしゃいました。ここで果てるようなことがあっても良いのですか？お嬢様にはバトラ様の向かいの席に戻る義務があるのですよ。
だからこそだ。わらわにしか救えぬ命があるならば、わらわはそれを救う。そして魔女と認められるぞ。わらわは魔女にならねばならぬのだ。これが試練であるならば、これまでの悪行に見合わぬ幼稚なものよ。
Dang. I'm so surprised how much she's...
姿を消せ。ロノ、かつて黄金の
I hope this isn't an act and she really has
最後となるかもしれぬ魔
grown
法
and
を
matured
見る
this
がいい。
much.
かしこまりました。黄金の魔女の名に恥じぬ魔法、拝見させてもらいます。願わくばそれが最後の魔法とならぬこと。
行け。もしインクが足りるなら、我が愚かなる生涯を記して同じ道を歩もうとする愚か者に手渡す。さらばだ、ロノ。
Alright, I'm gonna stop here, because... But, yeah. Good episode. It's interesting. It did... I thought when she saved Shannon, it was going to, like, kind of, like, open things up and ruin, like, the epitaph thing, and it sounds like it slightly messed it up, but I guess it didn't really. I don't know. It doesn't. I don't think we've seen the effects of it, but maybe we'll see in the end that of this chapter that okay, like it. She wasn't able to go through with everything because it messed up the first Twilight. Then, I mean, she really should have to. If it messed up the first Twilight, you can't have all the other ones after if the first one's messed up. So you would have to revive everyone and re-kill them, right? I don't know. I guess we'll see when we go from here. And yeah, guys, thanks for watching.